Barakatuh, and welcome dear viewers to a new edition of Spotlight. We are going to discuss the very important and historic visit on the part of custodian of the two holy mosques to Russia. Dear viewers, before we start our discussion, I would like to welcome our dear and distinguished guest, Dr. Yahya Zahrani, the political analyst. Dr. Yahya, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. And we also have Mr. V.S.Lucenko from Moscow, the CEO Winners International Limited, former director of the Russian Arab Business Council, former diplomat in the Embassy of Russia to the KSA. And Mr. Lutsenko, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Welcome, gentlemen.
You're welcome. Dear viewers, before we start our discussion, we are going to have this report and we will be right back.
Saudi King Salman bin Abdul Aziz Al Saud has arrived in Moscow on an official visit. The king has landed at the Vnukovo airport near the Russian capital. He is expected to hold a meeting later today with Russian President Vladimir Putin, discussing political and economic issues with him. The Saudi monarch was met by Deputy Prime Minister of Russia Dmitry Rogozin, Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Bogdanov, as well as the band and the honor guard of the Preobrazhensky Regiment. Recently, on September 10th, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov discussed bilateral relations between the Russian Federation and Saudi Arabia.
We are very glad that we could find common language and discuss a lot of issues during this meeting. I want to thank to my colleagues and Sergei Lavrov that we were met, and we are very glad to be in Moscow again to active our political dialogue, and our relationship with Russia is very important, and we appreciate the world role of Russian Federation.
Russian President Vladimir Putin already accepts the custodian of two holy mosques, Saudi Arabian King Salman bin Abdul Aziz Al Saud in Kremlin, who arrived on her historic visit to Moscow. The Kremlin press service has said that a number of issues of Saudi-Russian cooperation will be discussed. Leaders will consider joint steps to strengthen bilateral trade, economic investment and cultural cooperation. Both sides in the negotiations will exchange views on global issues. As a part of the 4-day trip, the king is meeting Russian President Vladimir Putin in Kremlin, and talks on the global oil market and the conflict in Syria. Relations have begun to improve in recent years, and King Salman, heir Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, has held several meetings with Putin. The agreement between Moscow and Riyadh helped reach November's deal, in which OPEC and 10 other oil-producing countries, including Russia, agreed to cut their production in a bid to combat a supply glut and shore up crude prices. The king has brought a massive delegation of Saudi businessmen with him, and the two parties are expected to negotiate new investment deals, including in the energy sector. The Saudis also have been eyeing Russian nuclear power technologies and appear ready to expand food imports from Russia, which is said to remain the world's biggest wheat exporter this year. Natalia Kursilova, Saudi 2, Moscow.
Welcome to the program. We are going to start our discussion with Dr. Yahya Zahrani. Dr. Yahya, we know that this great visit actually resulted in many agreements. Your perception of such agreements signed between the two sides?
Of course, this is a historical moment in the relation between Saudi Arabia and Russia. We know that Russia was one of the first countries that recognized Saudi Arabia in our declaration of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Russia also plays an important role in the world as the second strongest superpower in the international relations area. Also, Russia has an importance role here in the Middle East. Now they're existent in Russia, relations with Iran. So I think it is very important and very strategic move that this historic visit, it was the last visit was very long ago by a Saudi king to Russia. So I believe this is a historical moment for the Russian and Saudi relation, and I believe the indicators that shows in the agreement, especially the fund that exceed the 10 billion US dollar, which is a good start, because in fact the economic statistics and indicator between the two countries doesn't show the real importance of these relations. It is very low, and I believe there are a lot to be done in enhancing the cooperation, especially in trade and in commerce. Also, there was a very important and strategic agreement related to the missile, the S-400
Advanced defense system.
Exactly. So I think this is a very important move, and I believe there will be another agreements and more cooperation between the two countries that reflects the real power and the real size of the two countries. We are talking Russia around 144 million the population. We are talking 17 million kilometers square. It's a huge country with a lot of resources, a lot of advancement technology related to aerospace and to armament, to arms, and to a specific area that interests Saudi Arabia, especially related, for example, the energy. We saw the Minister of Energy, Dr. Khalid Al-Falih, also was one among the people who signed, in fact, a lot of agreements related to energy. Saudi Arabia also plays an important role in the OPEC, and Russia plays an important role out of the OPEC as the biggest country out of the OPEC, that allow Saudi Arabia and Russia to collaborate and to communicate with each other related to the oil market, which has a very important role to the future of the region and the future of the world.
Excellent. Let me go to Mr. Lutsenko. Mr. Lutsenko, I want to know your perception of the $10 billion agreements between the two sides, and also the importance of these agreements in enhancing and boosting the economy of both countries.
Well, of course, the agreements that were signed during the visit of His Majesty, the custodian of two holy mosques, are very important for both countries, because we know that just a few years ago, the Russian Direct Investment Fund and the Saudi private Saudi Industrial Investment Fund, they announced their agreement to promote a $10 billion joint investments in Russia. So now we heard that there is an agreement for $1 billion in energy sector, a creation of the investment fund, and also there is another agreement for the same sum of money for the high technologies that could be brought from Russia to Saudi Arabia. We know, of course, that Russian companies are very much eager to go to Saudi market, because they want to localize their production in Saudi market, and once it's branded as made in Saudi Arabia, they will have access to many Muslim countries, not only in the Gulf but also all over the world. So of course we are very much, as Russian business, we are very much interested in cooperation with this form of funding from the joint investment fund. More to the point, some of the private sector companies are now discussing from both sides, from Russia and from Saudi Arabia, creation of joint private funds. They will be smaller, but maybe not less effective.
Excellent. And when it comes to investing in technology and other sectors, you know, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia launched Vision 2030 in order to diversify its economy away from the crude oil. Is it satisfying for both countries when it comes to the amount of money allocated for the technology investment between the two countries?
Well, I would say that as far as spheres of interest are concerned, in Saudi Arabia, of course, the oil sector and technologies that could be useful in oil extraction, that could make it more efficient. We have such technologies. Also, everything connected with water, desalination, AC, air conditioning. We have many Russian companies that can make it more efficient. And it can be localized in Saudi Arabia. So it's, of course, from one hand, Russian companies that don't want to give the technology because it's their intellectual property. On the other hand, they understand that if they have to promote it all over the world, they have to start from somewhere. So I think Saudi Arabia would be the best place for this work.
Do you have an idea about the number of Russian companies operating here in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia? And do you expect that after the visit of custodian of the two holy mosques to Moscow will increase in the future?
I don't think they are numerous. I know that they could be just 10 companies, not more, in Riyadh, in the eastern province, in Dammam, in Jeddah. I know some companies are operating in tourism sector, in Umrah, and there are some Russian companies, they're working in Riyadh in water purification systems of the city of Riyadh. But of course this is just beginning, and we have now great chance to start the cooperation not only on the level of great and big companies such as Saudi Aramco, such as Lukoil, such as that they have already the joint venture like Luxar in Saudi Arabia, but also from the point of view of small and medium sector companies.
Excellent. Back to you, Dr. Yahya. Now, the agreements comprehends also purchasing advanced defense systems. How do you see this purchase on the part of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia when it comes to high and highly advanced defense systems?
Well, I think it's a good move because Saudi Arabia has its own tools of power, the soft power and the hard power. And I believe having this kind of apparatus of defense doesn't mean that we are always going to use it. It is very important to have the concept of deterrence, which means that we send a message that anyone tries to harm or anyone try to think to destabilize our state or our region, that Saudi Arabia is willing to defend itself. So this kind of purchasing is sending a clear message that the boundaries of Saudi Arabia and the borders of Saudi Arabia will be protected. As well, I think it is very important to indicate in the meeting of King Prince Mohammed bin Salman, when he said that every contract has this clause related to the local content, which means Saudi Arabia will also learn from that technology and try to nationalize or understand from this kind of technology how to use it, and of course building our own technology related to the defense industry.
So the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is planning to have localization of some military industries.
Of course. This is, of course, one of the pillars of the strategy related to the contracts of the defense missile or different defense apparatus. I think this is very important.
How important is setting up a joint military technical cooperation commission
It is very important. Russia is one of the advanced country in warfare, in especially missile. It plays also an important role in the region. Its existence in Syria. I think this kind of I don't know if I can call it alliance, but this kind of purchasing, this kind of cooperation is very important, because Saudi Arabia is trying to reach everybody in the world. It's trying to enhance the relation with all the all the capacity it can. But I think there are another also cooperation. I don't think it is just related to the defense missile or other just pure commercial. Russia has 10% of its population from Muslim citizen. Every year we are receiving Russian citizen coming to Hajj or to Umrah. So I think Saudi Arabia has an importance also in Russia. A lot of companies related also to Umrah and Hajj here practicing, and I believe that with the Vision 2030, a lot of companies, Russian company, would like to come and join the other international companies to benefit, in fact, from the different development in each sector, especially the infrastructure or the transportation, for example, or related to the energy. So I believe there are big chance and big opportunity in the future that Russian companies can benefit from the Vision 2030.
Okay. Let's go to Mr. Lutsenko. Mr. Lutsenko, Moscow State Institute granted custodian of the two holy mosques, King Salman bin Abdel Aziz, the honorary doctorate in recognition of his role in strengthening the relationship between Russia and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And we know that now with this visit, the relationship between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Russia reached a qualitative level. To what extent it's important, this honorary doctorate is important?
Well, I think the relationships between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Russia now on a very high level, and what the two countries, the two governments have to do now is to let business not lag behind the schedule. I mean, business have also to develop relations on their own level. So, of course, the fact that, for example, the Saudi Arabian Investment Authority organized a very big and very impressive investment forum in Moscow during the King's visit. Of course, it's very positive, and it was positively taken by Russian companies. There were a lot of companies, and there were B2B meetings, and now Russian business, they know a thing or two about Saudi Arabia, how things are going in your country. We got to know about the Vision 2030 declared by the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman. So, of course, all this is very interesting. More to the point, Saudi business came to Moscow and they saw what we have. Of course, Moscow is not Russia. We have to organize also visits to Russian countries. Many companies, they came from different cities to have meetings with Saudi counterparts. So many things were discussed here. Also, Saudi companies, they want to invest to Russia. Tourism from Saudi Arabia to Russia is being discussed, and there were several companies that are eager, Saudi companies that are eager to organize the visits of Saudi businessmen and Saudi public to Russia, to Russian cities, Moscow, St. Petersburg, Kazan. So many things are now on agenda, and I think that relations between the two countries are now going up. And of course, we noticed that now in Saudi Arabia, business is business, politics is politics, because of course the countries, they used to have some differences, you know, in politics, but it should hardly influence business. And the position of business is that we have to develop our interests to such an extent that then politicians, they would always ask us, what do you think about the relations between the two countries? If companies have huge investments in both countries, of course they are interested in stability of relations.
Excellent. Dr. Yahya, custodian of the two Holy Mosques, met the Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev. He stressed the importance of ending the suffering of the Palestinian people and achieving a just and comprehensive permanent peace for the Palestinian cause. And also he requires Iran to halt its expansionist policy and commits itself to the principles of good neighborliness and respect international norms and refrain from interfering in the internal affairs of other nations. To what extent the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Russia have identical views when it comes to actually the Middle East problems?
Well, of course, it's not always identical, as you mentioned, but I believe there is always a common ground that we can agree upon, especially between Saudi Arabia and Russia, where stability in the region can benefit the both parties. Of course, Russia can or already has an influence on Iran, of course, because of the historical relations between Russia and Iran. And also, it is very important that King Salman mentioned the Palestinian cause as it is the first cause for, or one of the important causes and the first cause for Saudi Arabia. Another cause also is Syria, for sure. And also Iran can play an important role also in returning the militia and pulling back the militia that contribute to the chaos situation there in Syria. And of course the same thing goes to Yemen, where Iran also support the Houthi militias. So I believe Russia is a key factor for the stability of the region, and I believe the amount of the delegation in fact reflect that the willingness of Saudi Arabia to not just invest, I mean to raise up the cooperation and the relation between the both countries. Of course, now we are talking also about the Kurdish state situation, about the situation, humanitarian situation, of course, of the refugees. The situation, of course, the complexity of the situation in the Middle East and Arab world is getting worse by the time, but engaging the Russian Federation and engaging the United States and different actors could play an important role in the stability of the region, for sure.
Excellent. The same question will be directed to you, Mr. Lutsenko. When it comes to the Middle East problems, we know that Russia, one of the main and key players when it comes to the Syrian file and Syrian crisis, for example, and it brokered many negotiations between the opposition and the Syrian regime. So, custodian of the two Holy Mosques actually gave importance to the Palestinian cause and consolidated, unified a stance when it comes to actually ending the suffering of the Palestinian people and having comprehensive and permanent peace for the Palestinian people. Custodian of the two Holy Mosques requires Iran to hold its expansionist policy. How do you perceive this demand and requirement by custodian of the two Holy Mosques when it comes to Iran's interference in the internal affairs of some of the GCC countries and some Arab countries?
Can you please repeat the question? The line is not very good, so I did not understand the question.
Of course. When custodian of the two Holy Mosques met with Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev, he stressed on the importance of having a comprehensive and permanent peace for the Palestinian people, ending their suffering. And also, he touched upon Iran, and he said that Iran should hold its expansionist policy and interference in the internal affairs of the Arab countries, especially the GCC countries.
Well, unfortunately, the line is bad. I can hardly distinguish the question.
We'll get back to you, Mr. Lutsenko, after this problem and the technical problem is fixed. Back to you, Dr. Yahya. Dr. Yahya, do you think that we are going to see the role of Iran in the future shrinking in the Middle East, especially in Syria?
I'm not sure about that, because Iran has a lot of militia there, and it has also in the Lebanon, for example, Hezbollah as an actor, a non-governmental actor, in fact, playing role. They are also gaining more power in Yemen by supporting more of the Houthi militia. However, I think we cannot. There is no, in fact, a white or black color in politics and international relations. There is always this gray area. There is always this complexity of power and interest. And I believe Iran
it's changing.
Of course, no doubt. While we are seeing now, for example, the Kurdish state that also will get Iran busy, and also Turkey, it's changing the shape of the whole region, and raising a lot of question about the state.
To what extent?
I mean, it's raising the question back to 1648, after the Westphalia agreement related to the nation state. So now we are seeing an ethnicity trying to create a state, which is something new in the region. So I believe there are a lot of power gaining, a lot of power losing in the region, new allies, and old allies. Of course, now Saudi Arabia is trying to use all the means, even whether the military means or even the soft power, to use also the diplomatical way. And I believe there are now some good messages from Iran, especially in the last Hajj. In fact, in the last Hajj, there was some good sign from Iran. So I believe that no matter the situation is getting worse, there are always an exit, and there are always a light at the end of the tunnel. So I believe if we can reach the power that has an impact on Iran, such as Russia, and arrive to an agreement with Russia related to the zone of influence, for example, and the balance of power between Saudi Arabia and Iran, with the existence, of course, of Russia and United States and other regional power, I think we will arrive to understanding and to common understanding that first, it is very important not to interfere in the national affairs, in the local affairs, and second, we can agree, of course, on anything related to the, for example, the zone of influence and the cooperation between the two countries.
Excellent. Dear viewers, before we move any further with our discussions with Dr. Yahya Zahrani and Mr. Lutsenko, let's have this report and we'll be right back.
First official meeting of custodian of two holy mosques, Saudi King Salman bin Abdul Aziz Al Saud and the President of Russian Federation Vladimir Putin in Kremlin was very productive. Russian President Vladimir Putin hosted Saudi Arabia's King Salman bin Abdul Aziz Al Saud for talks in Moscow, in Kremlin, in the first official visit of Saudi monarch to Russia that was expected to focus on oil and the war in Syria. At the Kremlin, Putin remarks hailed the king's visit as a landmark event. Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, in his reply, called Russia a friendly nation and said his country is committed to strengthen ties in the interests of peace and security.
большое спасибо, что вы приняли наше приглашение и прибыли с
Thank you very much that you accepted our invitation and came to Russia. It is the first visit in our history, and this event itself. Thank you very much that you accepted our invitation and came to Russia. It is the first visit in our history, and this event itself is remarkable.
The business program started from investment forum. More than 200 companies took part in forum, and such Russian companies as Gazprom, Sibur, Aeroflot, Fosgara and others. The visit of custodian of two holy mosques, Saudi King Salman bin Abdul Aziz Al Saud, goes along with Russian Week of Energy. More than 20 ministers from this sphere came to Moscow, as well as representatives from OPEC organization. It's not surprising that two-way communication tackles the energy sphere, as it is one of the common interests for countries. New steps were made in investments. Russian and Saudi Arabia Fund of Direct Investments will create two funds, each for $1 billion for energy and technology sphere. Russia and Saudi Arabia worked out many agreements that will bring the Saudi-Russian economy partnership to other spheres. For example, Saudi and Russia agreed in Kremlin that the transport direct infrastructure should be developed in the near future. Details will be discussed in El Riyadh. Also, with the support from Saudi Arabia, the Medicine Kit Center will be built in Tatarstan. Natalia Kursilova, Saudi 2, Moscow.
Welcome back, dear viewers. We are going to continue our discussion with Dr. Yahya Zahrani and Mr. Lutsenko from Moscow. Mr. Lutsenko, can you hear me?
I hear you, but quite badly.
Excellent. I will move to a very important point and thing when it comes to the oil production. We know that Russia might agree to prolong and extend the oil agreement on curbing production and oil supplies and raising prices. How important and to what extent is it important for both countries?
Well, as far as I know, the agreement on the cooperation in oil and gas sphere was signed between Russia and Saudi Arabia in 2003 when the then Al-Amir Abdullah visited Moscow. So far,
King Abdullah, yes.
Of course, countries, they did not explore that many opportunities in realizing of this agreement. But of course, the coordination of oil prices for two oil major superpowers is very important, which is being done now, and we see such cooperation underway this year, and next month there will be, if I'm not mistaken, a meeting in Vienna also. So it's perfect, and of course this is the focal point of such cooperation. More to the point, of course, Saudi Arabia could explore some oil and gas opportunities in Russia, and I think this is the second major focal point that can be relevant to the cooperation in this sphere. And of course, the access of Russian companies to Saudi Arabian oil sector is also very important. Not only huge tycoons, but also small subcontractors, companies.
Excellent. Dr. Yahya, we know that Saudi Arabia is proceeding with the initial public offering of a stake in Saudi Aramco, for example. 5% of the Saudi state oil producer will be offered in IPO next year that could value the company, for example, at more than $1 trillion, depending on oil market. So how important is this agreement between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Russia when it comes to curbing a production oil and also the oil supplies?
Of course, the communication and agreement between Saudi Arabia and Russia related to the oil prices is healthy for the all oil industry and all oil sector, because the size of the two countries and the amount of the production related to oil industry, of course, it has also an important role related to the companies that gets contract to buy the barrel of oils. So I believe it is very important. And also, you know that related to the IPO of Aramco, a lot of international stock market are very eager to have this stock in the Aramco shares within that stock market, of course. So I think this will open an opportunities also for the Russian companies to invest, and also to collaborate more related to the oil prices, because now a lot of things in the energy industry and oil prices can change, of course, such as the solar energy, or even the electric energy, of course, or the cars that use the electricity, or even the policy or regulation related to the fuel and oil, especially in Europe. So I believe that when Saudi Arabia and Russia comes to an agreement related to the oil prices, this is healthier for the oil industry, and of course it goes back to the benefit for the two countries, that because the two countries is depending on oil heavily, in fact. So I believe this is a good step, and we are also looking forward to more collaboration, not just on oil industry, but also in all energy, because we know Russia has the technology of the atomic energy and nuclear energy for civilian industry. So I think Saudi Arabia,
purposes.
Exactly, and Saudi Arabia is very eager also to develop that kind of energy, and of course to have the intellectual property and the knowledge, in fact, and know-how of this technology.
Excellent. Again, Mr. Lutsenko, the visit is widely seen as potential turning point in the Middle East politics and even the conduct of world oil markets. We know that the relationship between the two countries reached a new qualitative level, and we have convergence of interest between the two countries. So do you think that the agreement between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Russia when it comes to curbing production and also oil supplies would be a motivating for other countries to follow the example of Russia?
Excuse me, can you again repeat the question slowly?
Okay. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's agreement with Russia when it comes to curbing the production of oil and oil supplies. Do you think that, we know that Russia is one of the non-OPEC countries, and despite that, Russia is playing an important role in stabilizing the oil prices. Do you think that this is encouraging and motivating for other countries for actually to do more in this regard?
Well, I think, of course, that could motivate Russian companies, and the more opportunities the market offer to the companies, the more chances is, that if there is, provided that there is market economy, that the company comes, provides the best what it has, and then it can go to the market with a local partner, without the local partner. So I think the companies are very much motivated at the moment.
Excellent. We cannot but thank you very much, Mr. Lutsenko, the CEO Winners International Limited, former director of the Russian Arab Business Council and former diplomat in the Embassy of Russia to the KSA. Thank you very much again for joining us. Back to you.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Back to you, Dr. Yahya. So, again, do you think that the agreement between Russia and KSA when it comes to curbing oil prices will be motivating and encouraging for other countries to do so?
Well, of course, indeed, because it will at least assure the companies, the national companies, whether in Saudi Arabia and Russia, where to go and the roadmap of the prices, because of the weight of the two countries and the impact on the oil industry and oil prices, of course, the communication and the curbing of prices between the two countries and the alignment, in fact, and the agreement on the prices will play an important role to, in fact, show the companies how to invest and where to invest and how much the production should be in the future. So I think it is very healthy for the both sides. Also, it gives a margin of tactical move by the two countries. If for example, Saudi Arabia or Russia, for example, are trying to develop the non-oil revenue, for example, it gives the two countries a chance also to develop the national industry. For example, if we are talking about Saudi Arabia, the petrochemical industry or the mineral industry, for example, in Saudi Arabia. And also one of the pillars, in fact, of the Vision 2030 is not to depend on oil.
To diversify the economy.
Exactly. So I think having this roadmap of oil prices in the future by communicating and